Trigger warning, this episode contains mention of transphobia and sexual abuse. If this would be problematic for your mental health, skip this episode and we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Ocie Nelson. We have not started recording and the slurs have come out. I'd like it on the record that I'm the only one who didn't use the T slur.
So, because neither Kayte nor I are trans, we thought it would be a great opportunity to have a few actual trans people on the podcast to talk about their experiences. So we begged my roommates and they accepted. You just have this expression of complete fear on your face. So my roommates have given me the greatest gift this life has to offer: domestic bliss. They're some of my favorite people, and I'm super excited to talk to them about this topic today. Welcome, Ocie, Nelson, and Dino Zitlaw.
Zitlaw?
Yeah, Zitlaw.
Well, you know what?
Hi, hello. You can use my full name if you'd like.
Ocie
Iscariot
Nelson.
That's not my full name.
I don't know what, because you always make up a joke of what your middle name is, and then I'm gullible, so I believe it every time.
Wait, maybe
No,
you should
what
call
really-
me Dino Nelson too, and then everyone will be so confused because people will be like, "Wait, did Bryn and Dino get married?" And wait, are Ocie and Dino married? And
Okay,
Here's
so
the thing.
Dino.
Okay,
Megan
no,
asks
wait.
me constantly about what my middle name is, and I tell her every single time it's Grace. And yet,
Oh, I thought you said it was Marie, and I was like, that doesn't seem.
I thought it was Patrick.
no, Patrick's the fake dead name I give out.
Okay, so I have 3 roommates: Ocie, Dino, and Bryn. Ocie's last name is Nelson. So is Bryn's. They're not married.
Bryn isn't.
Bryn and Dino are together, but 2 out of the 4 of us last names are Nelson. And so they're like, we should just all change our last name to Nelson.
It'd be a power move, is all I'm
Yeah.
saying. It would just be
It would
very
straight
strong.
Fear into them.
We would be a unified house.
So Ocie is a 27-year-old
Trans woman.
trans woman,
My pronouns are she, her.
and Dino is a 25-year-old
Yeah.
non-binary person. Ocie and Dino live with me in Calgary, Alberta. They do things for capitalism occasionally. I would describe Ocie as gentle, affectionate, and mischievous. Do you say mischievous or mischievous?
I say mischievous.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
it's genius.
cool. She is very into all things fantasy and science fiction. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering. Nerd alert! I'm
You invite me onto your podcast for this? Roast?
Stop playing your game so you can come upstairs and I can roast you.
So we can listen to Harry Dresden together? You're right. That's way less nerdy.
Okay, I would describe Dino as a benevolent instrument of chaos. So Dino might not care what you think of them, but they will, by golly, make sure you are cared for. So I think they call that chaotic good in the... I don't know. Ocie, you're the expert. You're the expert. So Dino is very skilled at fixing things and has more marketable skills than I ever will have. They are in a committed and loving relationship with our other roommate, Bryn. But Bryn and Dino would like you to know that they've only ever held hands. Dino and Ocie have both been raised in the church. Ocie's pronouns are she, her, and Dino's pronouns are they, them. So I met Dino when I was living in an intentional community house known as the House of Commons. I didn't name it, that's all I'm saying. Dino used to work summers out at Gull Lake Bible Camp, and then they heard about the HOC through there. Many of our former HOC members are closely affiliated with Gull Lake. And so they, quote unquote, applied to live at the HOC. And they were there with me until we closed the house down. I met Ocie through Bryn and Dino, and I have no clue how you guys met.
Yeah, just through the Awaken
Yeah,
community.
but-
And
Yeah. Okay. This first question is for Ocie. Ocie, how long have you been living as a fully transitioned lady person?
yeah, so I think that question is a little bit complicated because, when you transition, I feel like probably for a lot of people, I mean, it's a pretty big life altering shift. And so it's less of like, oh, I've gotten here and now it's done, and more so in an ongoing process. And I think like, while I'm pretty confident in my identity and where I am at with it, you know, it's changed once before. So I'm who am I allowed to swear on your podcast?
Yeah.
So who the fuck knows, right? Like, that being said, though, I kind of came out publicly about 5 years ago, and that's when I started doing hormone replacement therapy. And so I've been living fully out for about the past 5 years.
Okay. Cool. Dino, how long have you been non-binary for? Your whole life since birth, but when did you when did you let the rest of the world in on it?
I came out on January 1st of
1986.
20.
You were born then. Just
I
kidding.
wasn't born.
Sorry.
Of 2021.
Oh, just a sweet little baby.
Just a sweet little baby. I had like that was like my full like public like post on social media kind of come out, but I'd come out to like a lot of like friends and family before then.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so this question is for both of you. How old were you when you realized that your sex and your gender identity did not match?
Do you want to start this time, D?
You gonna feel this one out?
I
figure we'll go back and forth.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Sharing.
Wow, sharing
wow.
is caring. I think it's like a really complicated thing for me, especially like my understanding of non-binary. I think when like the concept of like being transgender was presented to me, it was at a time when it was still a lot more common for people to view being transgender in like the gender binary of there's like two genders. There's you're either a man or you're a woman, and you can like go from one to the other, but like you can't just like be neither, which is what I would mostly identify as. So yeah, I would say like at that time, I think that like I never really felt like a female, like I was assigned at birth, but I first started like finding out more about like being non-binary and like how it was more of a like legitimate thing, because when I first learned about it, it was kind of in like a way where like being non-binary is like lesser than, or it's like kind of made up. It's like a little bit like silly and like niche.
Yeah.
But I think actually
edgy.
Now like it just came to me that the first time I had heard about,
You can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, whatever the fuck
Thank
you
you.
want.
first time I had heard about like non-binary identities from a perspective that kind of like clicked with me was when I was listening to Jonathan Van Ness's podcast. They had Alok, whose last name I don't know how to pronounce.
That's okay.
Okay, I think they kind of like dropped their last name.
We'll just use Jones and see what happens.
Yes, Alok Jones. Not their real last name.
I just knew that Jones was really easy to pronounce for white.
Yeah. Alok like went into detail on how the concept of like non-binary identities isn't like a new Western thing, and it's been present in so many cultures for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, so this like has like a history to it, and that kind of like legitimized it for me, I guess, more so. And so I think in that podcast when I listened to that podcast, I was kind of like, oh, okay, like I could see myself identifying with this. And then I just like started to learn more and more about it. And I think around like mid 2020, that's when I like fully realized that I did want to come out as non-binary.
Mm-hmm. Ocie, you're up to bat.
Yeah, so I mean, my journey has been very different than Dino's, but I've always kind of known. Like, I remember even, so like when I was 3 or 4, my family lived in Montreal. We would just go play a lot. Like, not necessarily at playgrounds, but we would just like make pretend all the time. And oftentimes, even back then, like one of my favorite like daydreams kind of was like, oh, what if I somehow magically got turned into a woman? Wouldn't that be silly and goofy?
Oh, that'd be crazy.
Right. And like, I always like growing up in the context that I did, even back then, kind of knew that the goal of existence through kind of like the Christian lens was conformity more so than standing out. And so I really did keep it to myself for a long time. I really did kind of treat that desire more as just like a silly daydream. But it was when I was 7 and we were living in Quebec City at this point. I had come home from school one day and my mom had been reading a newspaper article and she started telling me about it. And it was about, at the time, the youngest person who had ever transitioned, right? Yeah, I immediately was like, oh my God, that's something that people can do? This is so cool. This is so exciting. And then, I can't remember if it was my mom or someone else listening, but someone would just said, oh, that's so weird. Yeah. And so that was kind of the beginning of me really realizing how Christians felt about trans identities specifically. And so it took me a long time after that still to come out because I really was committed to being a good boy for Jesus.
Same.
You are a good boy for Jesus, Megan.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. You flatter. So how did your family and church community react when you came out?
Yeah, I mean, bad. Bad. I don't think that's maybe a shock. I think for me, there was a really big difference in how my family reacted comparatively to how my church community reacted, in the sense that it started off really bad with my family. I would say the reactions felt about the same, right? I think there was a lot of hesitation and fear. And I think a lot of people in a way, and I don't know if this is right, but I think a lot of them felt pretty betrayed. Because up until that point, I had really been presenting male, and I was really committed to giving it a shot.
Yeah, let's give this whole male thing a shot. See what happens.
Yeah, and so I think when I came out and started transitioning, a lot of people felt very disillusioned with who I was.
Yeah.
But I think the big difference with my family comparatively to my church community at the time was my family kept asking questions.
Yeah.
Right. And they did love me a lot. And so, despite them always holding a non-affirming position, they really did want to understand.
Yeah.
And so it did take a couple of years, but I think now, not all, obviously, but most of my family, I am super fortunate, are in an affirming place now. Yay. Which I recognize is not the case for many queer people in church communities. And vis-a-vis church communities, I came out right out after Bible school. And so most of my friends from Bible school dropped contact fully, right? Just because to them, they didn't want to be guilty by association. Yeah, well, I think a lot of them kind of felt by continuing to associate with me, they were kind of giving up their moral beliefs. Or
condoning the lifestyle.
Yeah, whatever reasoning you want to use for that, right? And I think what that really comes down to is more just internalized fear. Yeah. But yeah, and then I definitely did shuffle around church communities for a while, kind of always,
Yeah.
Not always fitting in exactly, but then eventually, I did find a way. It was more positive for sure.
What about you, Dino?
Yeah, so when I came out, I wasn't really actively a part of any church. I had been going to Awaken for a little bit, but then stopped during the pandemic. So there wasn't a big reaction from any church community for me. Who was more present in my life at the time was still my community from Gull Lake Center. And yeah, I think it was kind of similar to Ocie with her Kayte and my friends of them not really being sure if associating with me meant that they approved and if they were allowed to do that. It wasn't for the most part, for my closer friends at least, I don't think they really struggled with that. But yeah, I think that there was some kind of like awkward tension there. My family was definitely the harder sell, or at least my immediate family. That my parents, I had told them beforehand because I didn't want them to like find out on social media.
Yeah.
As much as a part of me was like, didn't necessarily like feel that they were like, oh, like an explanation. I just felt that it would go over better. And I mean, maybe it went over better than I could have, but I still think that there was a lot left to be desired. Yeah, I guess the church I grew up in did play a part in it, insofar as my mom really thought that God didn't want her to use my pronouns and my like chosen name at first. And so she talked to one of the pastors at her church, which I'd grown up at. And he said that if his son, like who was cis, but if his son was transgender, then he would use like his kid's name and like preferred name and preferred pronouns outside of the house. But when his kid was like at home, he would like use like his like he him pronouns and like his birth name. And so my mom was like, oh, that's what we'll do for you. Like whenever you come over to our house, like this is just what we'll call you. And I was like, I won't be coming over to your house, and I probably won't be seeing you much in general in that case. Like that just like is really demeaning. And my mom like
change her mind?
Yeah, she was instantly like, oh, okay, then we'll just like use they them pronouns. It was pretty whack. They do still definitely slip up on my pronouns and stuff, but it has like very like gradually been like less and less so. My extended family is more affirming. I actually just realized my aunt wrote me. Did you hear the Christmas card that I read at Awaken once? My aunt wrote me this card with like a beautiful kind of like type poem. I don't know if she found it or if she wrote it, but I'd love to go get it and read it. So yeah, this past Christmas, which was almost, I guess, the 2-year anniversary of me coming out, my aunt gave me this card that she wrote for me. It goes, in the beginning, God created light and separated it from darkness. Later, he created elm trees and that perfectly shady spot that is somehow light and dark at the same time. Another day, he separated dry land from the waters, but we still have marshes and fens. He created those too. Another day, he put lights in the firmament to divide day and night, but sunsets are so beautiful. It seems to me that the only truly binary systems on Earth are those created by man. I know that God made you, God knows you, God loves you, and so do we.
Yeah, that's so fucking nice.
Right? And this aunt, the kind of funny thing with that is that she's Mormon, and my mom spent like my entire childhood like telling me how Mormons are so
judgy.
Yeah, judgy and like backwards and like not loving. And yeah, somehow my Mormon aunt is like
the most loving of all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I read this, I was like, okay, I'm ready to convert to Mormonism. Like, I'll pray whatever prayer you got.
I'm a Mormon now.
Where's the altar call? I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm fucking ready.
So how have you been treated by the church? Were you told anything overtly, or was it more just like an undertone of like,
oh, this is just a big question.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think for me, it was both of those. For sure, both, right? Like, I think a very weird part about growing up queer is that in a lot of ways, you have to grow up a lot faster than a lot of other kids, right? And so, while like at school, my friends were playing Pokemon or marbles in the dirt, I was like, do you think it's wrong if God made me in the wrong body? And they were just like, what the fuck are you even talking about? A lot of the time when I was using people kind of as a sounding board to kind of figure out my feelings and stuff on this, I would end up going to adults.
Yeah.
Right? And as a missionary kid, all of the adults in my life were fairly fundamentalist when it came to their Christianity, right? And I would never ask it about me, right? I'd say stuff like, what do you think about gay people?
What do you think about someone who is not me, but who is
gay?
Exactly,
right? And I mean, like, clearly I did a good enough job because people were still shocked when I came out, right? But it was always kind of like the same thing of like, well, God, just hates some people.
Yeah.
And I mean, never explicitly as that, but like the amount of like mental gymnastics that they would have to do to like tell me that hating gay people was okay while also simultaneously having to love everybody.
deal.
It was really weird. I mean, I think I probably have an unfortunately common experience in the way that like I internalized a lot of messaging.
Yeah.
Growing up in the church. I think what people don't necessarily understand so much is that people think that I was either socialized a guy or as a girl, right?
Yeah.
When a lot of the time, like, I was just taking in messaging from both sides.
Yeah.
Right?
That would be so confusing.
And so a lot of the time it was like, I am a predator who only wants physical things. And I'm like, if I'm not restrained, who knows what could happen? And then on the other side, right, I'm being told that my body is basically just a tool of evil and temptation. Right. And so to put it like lightly, this has given me a very complicated relationship with my body and how I interact with other people given that, which I think in a lot of ways is kind of the church's goal. You know, I think that an embodied person is someone who is less likely to be manipulated by abusive spirituality and abusive theology.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, Bible school really fucked it up for me, I think, in a lot of ways. Because I think especially there, that's like where kind of purity culture messaging was at its strongest, just because we were a bunch of like very young adults, basically still kids, right? Yeah. Living on this island with basically no supervision. Because how kind of the leadership was structured was there's like 10 adults. And then most of the leadership were second year students, right? Then there was just like 100 first year students, right? So it's like 100 18-year-olds, a handful of 19-year-olds. And like,
that sounds horrible. Like literally horrible.
Yeah. I don't know why they thought that this would end well, you know? Like, I'm sure that it has worked for some people, but like at the same time, you know, you put a bunch of horny kids on an island with nothing to do, and they're...
What did they think was going to happen?
Right.
Like, what did they think?
But then because of like this purity culture angle, basically how it worked at the school was if you had sex,
you failed and you're going to hell.
They would kick you out. Like, no questions asked, they would kick you out, right? There was obviously a super unhealthy sex culture at this school, right?
But how would they even confirm? Did they have video cameras everywhere?
No, because I think like in a big part of my growing up in Christianity too was just learning to self-police.
Oh.
Right? Like, I think if you can convince someone that they are evil, but that they want to be good, they will tattle on themselves. Because that's the right and good thing to do, right? And so that happened in my first year where 2 of the students had sex and one of them was like, I did a bad and evil thing with my body. I am so sorry. And then they just kicked them out. And they were not expecting to get kicked out, or else I don't think they would have ever...
Self-police that hard?
No, they would have never come forward, right? Which kind of comes to like one of my biggest issues with that type of Christian structures. There's a lot of similarities in a lot of like fundamentalist Christian communities, but that kind of atmosphere covers up sexual abuse like perfectly, right? And like, while I was at that school, I entered into a sexually abusive relationship with one of the older students, but because there was such this culture of sex is evil, your body is evil, you are evil, and if you come forward, we're not going to help you, we are going to kick you out. It sure as hell silenced me. Who knows what other shit gets just like swept under the rug. I mean, the question, how have you been treated by the church? Like,
it's a loaded gun.
No, for sure. And like the reality is like in so many ways, like, as a vulnerable person, the church has failed.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, there are still so many themes that I connect with vis-a-vis Christianity and the church. But I think, like, at the end of the day, like, living life to the fullest and peace that surpasses understanding, that has never once come from engaging with the church.
Yeah.
You know? Now Awaken has modeled that a lot better, and I can see a lot of healthy Christianity and a lot of healthy spirituality in it, but the reality is I am a queer person who has been very hurt by the church. And unfortunately, like, I got out luckier than a lot of people, you know?
Yeah. Dino, I just asked Ocie this, but how have you been treated by the church? I know there was some stuff with a certain organization that we've already mentioned. It was called like
yeah, I like never was really interested in going to Awaken at first because I was just like, I had a lot of trauma, not even from Gull Lake or the church I grew up in, but I did gap year type program with a big missions organization known as YWAM, Youth with a Mission.
Ooh.
And that was like where I think the biggest part of my religious trauma came from. And so, yeah, I came back from that and lived at the House of Commons, was very like wary of like Christian groups. And I think Awaken, it seemed dangerous. And so that's why I never engaged with it for as long as I did. Yeah, YWAM was like an extremely controlling, kind of like insular. What YWAM and Awaken do have in common is that there is like a really big value on community, but I think the underlying reasons for that is like with YWAM, it was like about control and about like holding like power over like these young people, being able to like just manipulate them into doing like pretty much whatever. With Awaken, it's like a much more healthy thing of like, I'll believe that like together we're like stronger and better and healthier. Yeah. And there's like still space in Awaken to like celebrate our differences, space that like YWAM definitely didn't have.
Yeah, kind of community through unity as opposed to conformity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I never came out at YWAM or anything because early on I heard like multiple speakers like talking about how they were like ex-gay. Early on in my YWAM journey, I was like, oh, can't talk about really anything deep because it will be used against me.
How old were you when you decided to seek gender-affirming care, and what was that process like?
But it kind of like happened when I wasn't necessarily expecting it back in the summer of 2021. So this was like 6 months-ish after I first came out. I went to the doctor because I had mono, and it was kind of just like a checkup to see if I was like ready to go back to work or not. And my regular doctor was on vacation, so she had like a substitute doctor basically. There was just another doctor at the clinic. And well, like my family doctor is like very affirming and like definitely like is still learning. Like she's very like supportive and caring and kind. But this other doctor just like, she must just like have something going on in her life. I've always figured because she just like really like laid into me at this conversation where I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to go back to work yet because I think I got mono in the first place because work is really stressful. And she was like, well, why is work stressful? And then I was talking about how like I was working in a busy cafe and was just getting like misgendered by customers all day, and like customers would like make fun of my pronouns on occasion or like just like say such uncalled for things. Like she like brought like race into it in a really strange way and was like, well, like Black people like just got their rights, and like as like a transgender person, like you got to be patient, like you can't just expect that everyone's like gonna gender you correctly. Yeah. And so it's very upsetting. As I was like walking out of the clinic, I had to like pay for like the doctor's note to be like, yeah, I still have mono. But I like just really didn't want to pay this doctor for like being so mean. So I just like broke down and started crying. And so then the clinic director or like manager or someone,
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. It's a weird story. She like pulled me aside and like was another like very like she was like my doctor and very kind and compassionate. And like was like, wow, like this, we really like messed up. And she was like, actually, like one of the top gender doctors in Calgary works out of our clinic. His name is like Ted Jablonski.
Hey, Jablonski.
Yeah, Jablonski. Yeah, like half of the trans people in Calgary like see Jablonski, and he works out of that clinic. So we can like make sure that you're like at the top of the list, and we'll get you in like soon. And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that's what I want. And so then I went and saw Jablonski, and he was like, I think I started testosterone around March of 2022. It took a while because I had to get like blood work done and stuff. And like he does just like have such a long wait list to get in and see him every time. But yeah, so that's how I started accessing gender affirming care. Kind of just like a bad experience, but at least like good came out of it.
Yeah.
I guess.
Ocie, what about you? Did you see Jablonski?
Kind of. So for me, it was, I don't know. I think has always been a bit more clear to me, given that I've kind of just shuffled on over from one end of the gender spectrum to the other, where it's like, yeah, I knew I wanted bottom surgery. And like, I always knew I wanted to look more femme. I first started accessing gender-affirming care like pretty much right after it came out. So 2018, I was living in Edmonton at the time.
Yeah.
So I saw the Edmonton Jablonski. basically just like looked up, like gender specialists in Edmonton. Saw a gender specialist for like 3 sessions or whatever. She referred me to this doctor and yeah, got access to it. Bottom surgery is a whole other thing. I think maybe a lot of cis people have a misconception sometimes that like people just like are changing their genders.
Yeah.
And that this is just like something that can be done quickly.
Yeah.
Like swap.
Yeah, right. Like it's not.
Swap her out.
Part of me does wish it would have been as easy as getting like a tire rotation, but unfortunately, right? Like I started like medically transitioning back in 2018, and I was on the wait list the whole time for bottom surgery, and I had bottom surgery like a year ago.
Yeah,
that's a 4-year long wait list, right? Like I think if I was having second thoughts, I would have had. I had so much time to think about it. Right?
Yeah, a lot.
Like the whole process just takes so much longer than I think a lot of people think it does. Like even getting hormones took like 6 months of me making constant appointments and talking to people and like basically.
It's not like you just roll up in there and they're like, "Oh, sounds good to us."
No, like, and kind of like what Dino was saying. A lot of people, you need to convince them of it too, right? It's not even just like, "Hi, hello, I'm trans," and they're like, "Oh, here are your women pills," and then that's it, right? Like I had to sit down with multiple doctors and convince them that I was trans enough to start on hormones. Yeah, it's not a glamorous process.
No.
And then you go through puberty a second time, which is fucked. Like I don't think I've ever met a person who's been like, puberty, loved that.
Would love to do it.
Man, I wish I could do it a second time. Except this time you're doing it around all of your adult friends who kind of hate for it. You know? People who are like, why did you choose to be trans? Like, I'm like such a lazy motherfucker. Are you kidding me? If I could have not done any of this. Like, you think I like enjoy this?
Surprise, bitch, I don't.
Yeah, like the process is such a grind. But it was like, obviously it was worth it.
Yeah.
Like I need to make that very clear.
Yeah.
As much of a hell nightmare as it was worth it.
Yeah.
Quote one of the great trans prophets, ContraPoints. Like I just operate at the same level of dysfunction as everyone else now.
Yeah.
Right? Like life isn't perfect, but I don't want to kill myself anymore. So I've got that going for me.
Yeah.
You know?
It's always a plus. It's a big plus. But what are some struggles you face as a trans person that cisgender people don't have to struggle with or think about? Dino, you go first.
I mean, as a non-binary person, a really common example is like bathrooms. Like if there was no like fear of like my safety, I would probably choose men's, at least most of the time. But like being in a bathroom with cis men is like the scariest, like most near-death experience I think I've ever had. Yeah, I normally still use like the women's washrooms, but at some point I would like to grow a beard. And I'm like, at that point, it's going to be a little bit more tricky to be like, now I'm not going to be welcome in women's bathrooms either because I'm going to be so visibly not like a cis woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, I guess. But another thing is like medical situations. I recently started donating plasma, which overall, like doing it, I don't like regret going, but there was like quite the kerfuffle with them figuring out whether to put male or female on my like file because they don't have like an option to say like neither or like self-specified, which was like a little bit funny to me because I found most like medical places that I go these days do have that option. So it kind of like took me back a little bit when they were like so like stressed about not knowing which box to like put me in. Yeah. But yeah, now it just says female on my sheet, and everyone always uses she, her pronouns for me. And I'm not about to correct every single like nurse every single time.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to let that stuff slide. Sometimes it's like, and it is the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, you like feel a little bit like you're like betraying yourself, but it's like, why would I do the emotional labor for this stranger? Like,
it's not fucking worth it.
Yeah,
you know.
What about you, Ocie?
Yeah, I think something that a lot of cis people don't understand is just like the level of scrutiny that we're under, especially in my experience as a trans woman, right? Like, first of all, a lot of people just hate women. Right? Like,
was it like jarring kind of coming over and then being like, oh, people hate this gender?
Like, I don't know. Yes and no, right? Like, again, I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian environment. It wasn't like a shock to me that, people hate women? What? Who fucking saw this one coming?
Yeah.
When it comes to like really you're like cis het white men, it's hard to tell, like, do you hate me because I'm trans or because I'm a woman? Or probably both. No, but I think like, especially in my early years of transitioning, people were very hyper vigilant about like how I was dressing, how I was presenting. Like, I think I wore a dress shirt one time, and I like one of my great aunts or whatever were like, oh, so are you a guy again now? And it's just like, no, I'm just a lady who wanted to wear a fucking dress shirt, you psycho. Oh, it's getting easier, obviously, but in a lot of ways too, I'm like, oh, like I didn't start doing makeup until 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Whereas like all my peers who do makeup have been doing makeup like forever, you know? And so in a lot of ways, like it makes me feel like I'm pretty far behind on a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because there's this magnifying glass on my life. It's like, I'm expected to put out the same level of femininity as cis women.
Yeah.
But if I do that, then I'm trying too hard.
Yeah.
And then if I don't do that, then why did I even transition in the first place?
Oh.
Right? And I think a lot of the time in affirming communities and stuff, like, it's easy to forget that it's like that.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't need to try as hard and I can just be myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Even then, like some people do it. Like once they find out I'm trans, they'll be like, oh, what little piece of you can I pick out that will be like, oh, yes, I should have seen that one coming because of course you are trans because of this thing. Right.
Yeah.
And so there is weird tension living as a trans woman of like, how do I honor myself and my body while also existing in a world that really does make people like me to be like public enemies?
Yeah. There's probably like this constant pressure to like the onus is on you to convince other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like no one can, that's exhausting.
Oh, no, it really is. Right. And I mean, like, it gets easier all the time, I think, right? But, you know, it's still something that, like, I just have to navigate, you know? And I'm very fortunate to be in a place right now where I have a lot of people who just respect me as a human being. Woo! But, you know, I also operate in a lot of spaces where, like, I can't assume that that's the case. Working at a senior's home.
Oh,
you know, going to a mall.
Yeah.
You know, going to a doctor's office, like Dino has mentioned. Like, you never know. When a transphobe is going to pop up. Yeah, like when you need to defend yourself, basically, right? And so you're kind of on high alert all the time. And I imagine like a lot of those feelings are similar for a lot of minorities. Like, being aware that like people could just start perceiving you negatively at any point and then you'll be in danger, right?
That's awful.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for coming on my social experiment podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That concludes our episode for this week. Thanks so much for listening. You can catch us on Instagram at showbizpod or by email at showbizbabypodcast@gmail.com. We'll see you next week for a completely unhinged discussion on online dating. Bye!